that's like those first couple are things that are like, these are things that, I would want to do and either are difficult now or were kind of prohibitive before. And then the second half of the microprofile things are very much designed for, um, these are the more microservice-y ones where like you can imagine the notion of a microservice being you have lots of little servers and sometimes they go down or sometimes they're unavailable, that sort of thing. But these technologies can be useful in Domino is not micro. It's a lot of things, but it's not micro.
Very much
But
so.
there's nothing stopping you from using these, and I'll go through these and kind of talk about like where they might be used. Like right now I just provide the capability. It's kind of like up to you to use it, but I am going to figure out ways to use these things more. And I'm going to start with metrics. And so this one is, it will track your calls to your REST services. And so you have some options that some it'll do by default, some it will opt in, but this will say, I called, this is the JSON example that I was showing earlier, where I was generating JSON. Oh, it was actually calling the REST service and it was generating JSON for the response. And I can see that I called that one time and it took 0.09 seconds. Incidentally, a lot of this stuff ends up really fast on Domino, and it's very good to see. That's very gratifying. That like once it's, there is still that initial load time that you get with XPages, but once it's loaded, it's speedy.
Wow.
But if I made multiple requests, it would say, oh, this has been called 347 times, and on average, it takes 1.5 seconds. The fastest was 1 second. The slowest was 300 seconds. And it's like, okay, what the heck is going on there? So this is kind of like how in XPages in the stack, you have all these profiler options. And I think it was Tony McGuckin at one point years ago did a video on like, here's how to opt in.
Brilliant. Yep.
And the way that you do that is you have, here's your surrounding method call that says, is profiler active? If so, start profiler, call the real method, end profiler, log profile. If it's not active, just call the real method. And so like, that's fine, like it works. And in the actual XPages stack, they do that all the time. Like that's all over the place. I think the extension library uses it. And obviously that's how you normally do things in Java. But this is better than that. So this is building on CDI, and some of the weird magic that I referenced earlier about CDI is that you can apply custom behavior surrounding a method when you're calling it. How this works, you don't need to know. I don't know how it works, but the point is that it does work. And so what I did here is I said this method is simply timed. So this will explicitly say, I want to track this method, the number of invocations and how long it takes. There are other ones, I don't remember them off the top of my head, but like there are other annotations that all you do is you just opt in and you say, I want to track this and keep track of these metrics. And so then you'll call that. And then when you go to get this metrics list, that will be included and it will tell you, here are the stats of it. You don't have to do anything else. And as you can see, 0.09 seconds, it's not adding a lot of overhead. Like it's not, it's not very expensive. And so like technically, yes, it's more expensive than if you didn't do it, but imperceptibly. And so where I plan to use this is, for example, I have a client app that has like hundreds of services that have just kind of grown organically over time. Some of them were for mobile apps, some of them are for newer apps, some of them have been replaced by other ones, but we're not sure. And that's where it gets tricky because like, how sure are we that they are fully replaced by other ones? Because we didn't delete them. So technically we could have code somewhere. We got a lot of code. We have a lot of stuff going on. Like, how sure are we that nobody is using this? If we delete this and we deploy it, are we going to get a call at 1 a.m.? This is how you can tell. You can turn on metrics, you can enable this, and then after a month, look at the metrics and say, okay, was this method called? Like, yes, it was called 10 times. Like, okay, now we know, all right, it's used somewhere, so we got to track this down. Or it was called 0 times, like it just was never called. Like, okay, that's a way to say this is not used. You can also say, hey, the users are complaining that the employees list page is slow. And it's like, okay, well, it's fast for me. I don't know what your problem is. But then you can look and say, oh, this specific thing that this is calling, like, oh, it's not the employees list, it's the user photo service. Takes, 10 seconds every single time. Like, that's weird. I wonder why that is. And so like the more you break things down, which is where the MicroProfile comes in, the more you break this down, the more you can get metrics for this sort of thing and say, these specific services, this is slow. why is this low? Then you know this is the thing I need to look into. Like you can set yourself an arbitrary goal. I want to make sure that all services are 5 seconds or less or whatever. You shouldn't do that, but like you could. And then you could look to see which ones are over 5 seconds. Can we get that faster? Can we hit this goal? Like, can we focus on that? And so like you can find hotspots, you can find usage, and then you can find the other metrics, which would be useful if I remember what those were, but they're in there too. There's other things that will tell you this. So this is the sort of thing where like you enable this, and then now you're getting data that you would not have had otherwise. Like in theory, you could crawl through web browser or web server logs for some of this stuff, but not in the same way, not nearly as usefully, because this will point you to the class in Java that is responsible. And there are tools that will parse this out. This is a standardized format. I think it's OpenMetrics, if I recall correctly. So if you had another tool that read metrics from Domino and other services, or just presented it in a nice way, this is that format. Like this, this weird, ugly format, they didn't make it up just for fun. It works with other stuff. So this now provides this, and now your NSF is collecting this information, and now it exists, and now it's readable. So you gain this capability and say, oh, now I can do stuff with this. Like I didn't even know this was a problem, and now it's solved. So you have these interesting capabilities.